great stories begin at. Once upon a time. These are myths said to have began hundreds of years ago. In the islands of the mermaids, pirates, and an elusive moon map. Relics of old. Soon to be forgotten. Forever. Unearthed by the unlikeliest of heroes. The majestic lighthouse had been owned by the same family for generations, located on its furthest point of the misty cliffs, high above the islands themselves. Oddly enough, a family of fishermen. Above all in these islands, there were no jails, no sheriff. The captain was above all and made all the rules. He led all matters at the main ports. He was a very respected captain by the people. The captain and his wife cared even less for outsiders and disdained the thought of them interfering in their affairs. However, their sudden tragic passing caused their two young children, Stella and Jax, to become orphans. The children, proving helpful to themselves, built a tiny cabin, snuggled into a large tree overlooking the bay. Stella grew up wanting to be an explorer, however took a part-time position at Mr. Hall's museum instead. While Jax took on a part-time shoe cleaning service at the train station, also taking the heavier supplies down to the docks.
Storybox Audio.
Stella, taking in a deep breath, admired the lighthouse, as she did often. Noticed a tall, slender-built man, who seemed to be walking hastily. Quietly wishing him well, carried on into town. A huge tree all but blocked his view from his side of the bay, momentarily thinking he saw a woman climbing into it. Getting up to get a better look, with no luck. His eyes chasing shadows. Sat back down in deep thought of her. Wondering, where was she, could be.
The misty calm of the bay helped to provide her with natural shelter and aided in no one noticing the mysterious stranger watching them all. Stella cleaned everything up before leaving the museum that evening, just to notice the lighthouse keeper looking out into nothingness at the end of the pier. She, seeing him around, walked out and introduced herself. Neve thought he heard someone standing up. He didn't see the young lady approaching him. She thought to blurt out an invitation to a picnic her and her brother have ever years in honor of their parents. Him, while she was rambling, nodding his head in accepting, walked, seemingly in a hurry, back the other way. Yet he smiled at her the way her father had done many times before. Perplexed her, however, she was happy to have invited such a lonely character. From the moment Grace woke up on the sandy shore in the bay's rocky caves, she had been unnoticed as of yet. Still dazed and confused of what has transpired. Questioning herself, as she carried on. Her only instinct was to find food and shelter, and to get warmer than she was. Drenched in icy sea water, she wept cold and alone. The sun rose warm and inviting. Grace, hearing footsteps, crept up into the lush covering of the forest. The vines provided her with an observation point. Looking out from the tree limb, she perched herself on, noticed a few people walking up the path towards the cabin below her. Days spent sneaking and foraging, becoming accustomed to getting around, and most of all, unnoticed. On this day of Stella and Jack's picnic, Grace thought to herself that the man walking with the two others looked familiar. So, quietly she watched from a distance, trying to remember anything. Cautious, she drifted off to sleep. Stella and Jack spoke kindly of Neve, and his crazy stories of these waters. The homeland of mermaids, pirates, and moon maps. Neve still kept to himself, more than most. However, keeping up with Jax and Stella, from time to time. He always valued his solitude, times to reflect on those he loved most. Lost memories at sea, tugging at him like a heavy anchor dragging the sea floor. Without fail, Jax could be found at his shoe stand at the train station every weekend, and particularly loved Christmas holidays. It was his busy season. The trains smashing into each other shook the icy foundation, which he was rather used to. Knowing he wouldn't be missed, took his only chance to retrieve a splintered box out of its hiding place. A special place underneath the very place he worked. His father took him many times before his tragic accident. Maximus bestowed the secrets to him long ago, wanting Jax to hold the tradition of protecting the Mermaid Kingdom and its inhabitants from other fishermen. After retrieving the splintered box from its hiding place, he laid out its contents, studying the yellowed map intently, made way to his ship, carefully positioning the compass as instructed by his father before him, made a heading towards the secret caves under the large waterfall far north of the islands. As those before Maximus, he vowed to protect the Mermaid Kingdom from extinction. Mankind grew eager to possess and exploit the mermaids' gifts, steal their powerful relics. For centuries they were hunted relentlessly. Only one relic remained. Neve worked endless hours taking care of the lighthouse. Working well into the evening, he started to feel uneasy, as if someone or something was watching him. Seeing that Jack's ship was heading out to the northern parts of the islands, where nobody dared venture. Closing up for the evening, Stella felt uneasy enough to start running home. as if someone was chasing her, hurrying home to get out of the dampness. The night fell sharply. As she made it safely home,
Storyblocks Audio.
she sat and worried of Jack's whereabouts. It wasn't like him to disappear. Jax, carefully navigating his way into the narrow strait, paying attention to the moon's position, could almost see the waterfall ahead. As Stella and Jax built the tiny tree house, taking care to build it high up into the tree, each having confidence in themselves for accomplishing such a feat so young. It's been weeks now, and Stella still pondered of where Jax could be, as the holidays were in full swing. Grace felt invisible to those around her. No one paid attention to the small-statured woman slowly stumbling through the street. Nor had she had wanted it. What would she have said? She kept going, one foot in front of the other, carefully balancing her gait. And to not faint from her hunger. Far worse than her hunger, having to steal clothes to stay warm. She walking back to the tree she found refuge in, just wanting to curl up and rest her aching head. Neve took care of the lighthouse every day, cleaning up for the night. Glanced across the bay. A huge tree all but blocked his view. Momentarily thinking he saw a woman climbing up into it. The memories lingered even heavier, worried he would never find her again. With his gaze scanning the waves for a clue of what had happened to her.
Storyblocks Audio.
As long as anyone knew him, they knew him to be skilled yet fair. And always walking the shores. Knowing the sea called him by name, how could he ever leave? How could he let go? The storm of the century was coming in fast, and Neve had to check the grounds that fateful night. something crying out for help. He leaned in towards the calls in the night, listening. Jagged boulders cutting through the waves, and then he saw her. There were generations of mythical tales about sea creatures, focusing his eyes and net directly on her. Rogue waves thrashed the ship from side to side as the net bounced over the deck. Letting go of the lever, he dropped her on deck. Without a care for his safety, and knowing he just broke the main law of the islands,
Storybox Audio.
ran to her. It was a justified risk he was going to take.
Storybox.
Keeping Grace a secret wasn't an easy task. Every voyage he took, she would give chase to the sides of his ship. They spent every day at open sea together. Trusting Neve after all this time, she showed him the secret entrance to the Mermaid Kingdom. Behind the largest waterfall in the Northern Islands, no one dares go. He kept her as safe as he could. Until one stormy night not so long ago, she disappeared, never returning. Closing up the museum early for the day, she gathering her things, rushing out the door to hurry before all the stores closed for Christmas Eve, so as to get Jax a Christmas gift for when he returns. She, being in such a hurry, plowed right into Grace, almost knocking her over fairly easily. Stella, noticing the young lady's tattered appearance, invited her up to her cabin to get warm. Feeling horrible for almost trampling her into the snow, Stella knew the young lady had to get dry. Stella rambled on, as Grace kept nodding in approval, the excitement of her not being cold and alone. Listened to Stella ramble on through the evening. As they settled in for the evening, the snow began to fall heavier. With the weather not letting up, Stella being the gracious hosts to the only company that they ever had, except Neve from time to time, made Grace as comfortable as she could by the tiny fireplace. Grace, feeling safe and warm, drifted off to sleep. Stella sitting quietly by her window, looking out for any sign of Jax, still pondering Jack's whereabouts. The weather was getting worse. Neve had finished his day's work at the harbour, pausing and glancing across the bay, took a moment to reflect on just whom Stella's new friend really is. Grace felt someone at the entrance to her cave, immediately swam away from Neve to protect what was left of her kingdom. Captain ordered his men to push and chop the vines overgrowth from the entrance to the Mermaid Kingdom. What remained of it after the war? As fast as the crew could muster, pulling, cutting, chopping at the thick moss and vines, made their way into the Mermaid Cave. Before the moonlight disappears, with their torches dimly lighting up the capacity of the sunken ancient castle's cavern walls. The large mermaid queen statues had ancient carvings etched in them, lining the huge hall to King Triton's most valued weapon. As the moon came into position lighting up the way, the torches barely having a flicker of light compared to the denseness of the deep castle. They all stood in amazement of the two huge statues of ancient mermaid queens embellishing the entrance as well. The captains greedily thinking to grab King Triton's weapon, selfishly stepping forward to grab it. He came too far not to get what he came here for. The captain's first mate being persistent that there was something in the sunken castle with them, as all the intruders started to hear crashing boulders into the dark waters below. The captain, stepping forward, triggered a collapse. At the same time, men, before anyone could see what hit them, Dot in a huge wave of her tail sent men flying everywhere up against the cavern walls, knocking their torches out. Grace had to protect what was left of her kingdom. Sea water rushing in as men scrambled to stay afloat. Grace tried to shield herself from the falling debris, getting hit in the head, lay there hurt, slightly maimed, as the men were washed away, never to be seen again. Feeling herself losing consciousness, slowly tilting her head before losing her eyesight, blurred into nothingness, looking as quickly as she could, towards the entrance to the Mermaid Kingdom, had almost been closed forever. Being the captain's son was never easy. Maximus showed him the secrets of the islands and what they held, and how special they really were to outsiders that came looking for them, teaching him, if ever caught helping the sea creatures. In these islands this position took a formidable man. Maximus was careful orchestrating his duties, as his father taught him to do so. In time Jax understood his responsibilities would weigh heavily on his young shoulders. However, Jax looked forward to the day he could share his secret with his sister Stella. Jax knew his father's generation of captains, as he also grew up in the islands working both the harbour and train station. Everyone expected the best of him as he demanded from himself. Working alongside of Maximus, in time learned the greed of others at a very young age. Encountering others at the harbours claiming to have seen the sea creatures and treasures beyond belief in these caverns. Many times seeing the unexplainable artifacts himself. Jax, as did his father, took the island's welfare seriously and its never-ending commands in itself. Spending a decade making sure he had all the specific preparations, Jax gathered everything he needed to make his voyage to the Northern Islands as fast as he could without being noticed. He didn't have but a few more weeks to make it to the Mermaid Cave in time. Before the moon's light would shine down on the compass, one of the few last relics held by humans, he held in his hands, showing him the entrance to the Mermaid Kingdom. If he didn't make it on time, the entrance would be lost forever. Jax, bound and determined to keep his promise to his father, worked hard to get his ship away from the jagged boulders they shone in the rising and falling of the waves. Anchoring at the waterfall's edge, making his way up to the sunken city, pulling at tangled roots and overgrowth of vines proved to be grueling for one. It was almost time. Grace, opening her eyes from arrested sleep, stumbled sleepily over to the cool foggy widow facing the lighthouse, trying to understand why it looked so familiar. Without waking Stella, Grace went up to her limb, just wanting to take a look around, sat quietly watching a man coming up the shaded path. Weeks went by. The holidays were especially cold. Ships in the harbor came and went with the tides. Neve worked at the lighthouse, quietly worried about the trio. He couldn't shake the thought that he recognized her new friend from afar. Stella's new friend. Was that her? Was she still alive after all this time? The eve of the Mermaidian moon was weeks in coming fast, and the entrance to the mystical cave behind the waterfalls would be revealed soon. Jax knew, only then, Grace could then be reunited with her fellow sea creatures and finally live her days as they should be, with her kind, and not being hunted. Neve decided to take an unscheduled walk out to the cliffs, full of questions that needed answers. Making his way up the path towards the tiny treehouse. Slowly walking up to the tree limb she was sitting on quietly, standing there for what seemed like an eternity, catching his breath. It was Grace.
Storybox Audio.
Grace startled, turned and saw the kindness in his eyes, studied his face softly, heart bounding, memories of all they ever shared. She too could see in his face, his lips tightened and sadness in his gaze. He too was reminded of the way things had to be, staring into each other's eyes, embracing Grace, as she too held him. Time has a strange, eternal way of bringing the lost back. He only knowing in this moment, he would never lose her again. If there were a way to have both lives to live together, as one, she knew of no others before her ever dreamt such a thing, afraid to be hopeful. Yet, still, they locked eyes with desperation, grinned determinedly. Their fates mutually decided in that moment to attempt what no one before had dared. He would accompany her to her native homeland. However, they would have to hurry as fast as they could before it was too late. The two grasped hands and started running as fast as they could before the Mermaidian moon closed the portal to the mermaid kingdom forever hiding the entrance. Jax struggled to keep the entrance open. The intensity of the moon's light suddenly started to make the entrance rage uncontrollably with pulsing energy. As Neve and Grace came up to the portal, stepping up to go through, Neve momentarily looking back at Jax, silently nodding assuringly. He wasn't returning, both never knowing they had someone on their side the whole time. Knew Jax didn't have long before the moon's light gave way. Flashes of light flickered. They knew they had to jump now, and in a blinding flash, they were gone instantly. All that remained was a cavern of burnt stone.
Storybox Audio.
Perplexed, Jax sat down on the high cliff of the waterfall that Neve knew of the kingdom of mermaids, marveling at the sights he just witnessed, laughing to himself, thinking, his sister isn't going to believe his tall tale.